Hi,
Hi,
David.
Andy.
Hey, David.
Josh. Well, we are on time. Good morning, good afternoon, and perhaps good evening to some of you.
Esta reunión está siendo grabada.
For those of you that are attending this on an evening, I admire your commitment. We are going to wait a couple of minutes in case people join in the first 5 minutes, and then we're going to start. I don't know if there are any logistical questions that anyone may have before we begin.
Well, I will just mention we plan to share the workshop materials at some point, maybe after the workshop.
La grabación se ha detenido.
Yes.
Those of you who just joined, I was mentioning that we're going to wait a couple of minutes to see if anyone is a bit late, and then we're going to start. I think 5 minutes is reasonable enough. So,
Esta reunión está siendo grabada.
again, good morning, good afternoon, perhaps good evening. Thank you very much for attending this workshop on the Berkeley assessment system software. Today, we're going to try to present to you in a summarized manner the key ideas of the BEAR assessment system and introduce to you the software that we have been developing for now a long time here at the BEAR Center, trying to make it easier to implement the ideas associated with the BEAR assessment system for assessment development. As a general flow suggestion, I would prefer if you have questions that you just use the microphone to ask them. Feel free to interrupt me as we move along. And if you are shy, feel free to use the chat. However, I may sometimes take a couple of minutes to notice that questions may be posted in the chat. And if you are really, really, really shy, you can send me a direct question, not making it public in the chat too. I'm not sure if there are any other questions or actually any questions at all before we begin. Any complaints? Okay, so let's begin. I'm going to, while I'm presenting on this, the software or the slides, I'm not going to share my video. So the Berkeley assessment system software, as I said, we're going to introduce it. I'm going to be presenting today. I work in this system as a psychometrician and teacher designer. However, I would like to acknowledge that the bulk of the work, and by the bulk, I mean somewhere between 99 and 99.5% of the work of making the system happen, it's done by two programmers, Ana Maria Albornoz, who's the lead programmer, and Chanel Tissot, who is our other programmer in the system. Thanks to both of them, we are able to develop and construct and improve this system. And both of them, I think, are here. Thank you very much for all your work on BAS. So the plan for today, the way that I thought this would work is the following. We're going to, in my mind, this would be 5 chunks of about half an hour. We'll see how it goes regarding my timing. But my expectation is each one of these half an hour and hopefully a couple of minutes in between. If I go too fast, we may use some time in the last segment about item development. But it's not the priority thing that I would like to show you today. So the first step, we're going to start with a brief introduction. I see many familiar faces that have some relation to the Berkeley program. They may already be aware that there is such a thing as the BEAR assessment system. So this part, it's just the bare bones to introduce the key conceptual elements that are behind the system. And then I'm going to give a brief introduction to the key ideas or how those ideas are implemented, the basic vocabulary that you need to understand how the system works. And having done that brief introduction, we're going to move to some actual examples and actually letting you use the software, let's just say in a guided manner between steps 2 and 5. You are going to log into the system, you will be able to create an account, take a look, and I'm going to guide you through 4 exercises that will allow you to see different functionality that we think may be of interest to you. These 4 exercises do not completely encompasses the capabilities in BAS, but I think reflect some useful things that some useful activities that are not necessarily well covered by other software that may be available, and particularly to the extent that BAS allows you to work in all of them in the same system. Any questions before we begin with our brief introduction? Well, so let's begin. So the Berkeley assessment system, as probably some of you have heard, is an integrated approach to developing assessments that provides meaningful interpretation. This is the key idea behind the entire approach, and hopefully behind the software. You will see that we don't want people to simply produce numbers. We want them to be able to produce meaningful inferences after working on an assessment development. So what we're going to try to do when we use the Berkeley assessment system is use this integrated approach to try to begin with a cognitive model of what is the attribute that we want to assess, and thinking of, or in this case, in the educational context, what might be developmental goals of the curriculum, try to gear toward making meaningful inferences on that regard. So the assessment system has 4 building blocks. These are at the core of the test development or assessment development process. I'm going to now very briefly present the key ideas in each one of these. The construct definition is the first building block. To put it plainly, this is where we define what we want to measure. This is how we try to conceptualize the attribute that we are interested in. However, I would like to highlight here, and this is the key point, that although many, if not all of the models for developing assessment will start with a definition of the attribute, what we're thinking here is a very, very specific structure. This is not a typical table specifications or a list of contents that needs to be covered. We're thinking of something that we call a construct map. And a construct map, as is indicated in the slide, is a well thought out and research ordering of qualitatively different levels of performance. I will very briefly illustrate what a construct map is with 2 or 3 examples. This is an example by Nathan Brown below in the slide, which will be available later on. You can see the reference. Here we have a description, a model of cognition of how students may present certain explanations of different phenomena when they're trying to understand a new topic. And as you can see, the specification of the attribute here, it's represented in these order levels. And each order level has a characterization of the person. We have in this particular construct map these nice diagrams that allow you to sort of see more or less what, or try to make a representation of what is presented in the side of the description of the person. And we also have, and this is also typical for in the way that we represent some construct maps, is start to figure out how people who are at a specific level would respond. So we have here a description of what the person would be thinking, what is their cognitive performance level in this construct. And from that, we try to illustrate that with a description of the kind of response that we would see from that person. So this is one example of a construct map. Here we have another. This is from a curriculum trying to explain to kids why things sink or float. And very briefly, hopefully you can see this zoomed in now. Very briefly, you can see that the kids, as they start to the process of understanding, they may be very lost. They either cannot respond, they are off target, and then they start developing perhaps they start to notice unconventional features. Eventually, they may develop into productive misconceptions. They see something that is relevant, they don't understand why. And as they progress, they are at some point able to understand the idea of mass or the idea of volume. Later on, understand that both mass and volume are relevant. And finally, move on to the upper understanding of why things would sink or float, which is that density is relevant, and not only the concept of density, but relative density. So this is a description of a construct. And what I was saying in this first building block is that we are not looking for a general description. We're not looking for a set of contents. We're not looking for a list. We're looking for the structure of order qualitative levels. So last example, and this is an example that it will become relevant because I'm going to be using the exercise throughout the workshop, this particular construct. This comes from a project I'm going to introduce it in a minute that presents, sorry, the project was looking to teach statistics to middle school kids. And this construct in particular is conception of statistics, not statistics as the overall branch of knowledge, in particular the idea of a statistic that summarizes a characteristic of a distribution or a population. And what we have here, and this screen that you're seeing here at the moment, is how a construct looks inside VAS in the system that we're going to be discussing. And I'm just highlighting that even though this construct has a number of sublevels and many details, we are mostly going to be using the summarizing this construct in the idea of 4 levels. We have a level, very low level, in which students are not able to produce responses that are intelligible to the extent that you can make an inference regarding their understanding of a statistic. And then I'm highlighting other 3 levels that explain what we think is happening with the understanding of students at those levels. So at level 2, the students may be able to calculate it, calculate a mean, calculate a standard deviation, but that does not mean that they actually understand what happens. I have to say, this is not only an issue in middle school, it's also an issue in undergrads. They may be able to tell you what a mean is, but not explain to you their properties. So as you move upwards in this construct, you may be able to find that the students gain a better grasp of what a mean or a standard deviation is, what are the properties, and how the distribution may influence. So this particular example, as I was saying, is from the Assessing Data Modeling project. It was a project developed jointly between Vanderbilt and UC Berkeley by Rich Lehrer and the team at the Berkeley Center led by Mark Wilson. Please remember these levels because, as I said, some of the data and some of the things that I'm going to be illustrating are based on this. So when you see something that says cost 2, cost 3, what I'm referring is to a particular level in this construct map. Any questions so far? Not everyone at the same time, please. I will repeat so people have joined. If you have questions, please feel free to use the microphone or the chat to interrupt me. So this feels a little more interactive. Okay, so the second building block is item design. This is in general, I would say rather self-descriptive in terms of the name. However, I would like to point out that the idea here is that we are building items, again, not to satisfy a particular cell, generally in a table of specifications. What we want are standardized situations or tasks that will allow us to elicit performances in students that we think will give us evidence of the different levels of the construct. That's what we're looking for. So we want evidence of a certain cognitive states in a particular level of a construct. And we are looking for items that allow us to do that. So just to keep with this particular example of conceptions of statistics, this is an image of an item that was used in that particular project. We have information about 3 projects. One is missing. We tell the person the mean score for that project, and then we ask for that person to try to find out what was the score in that 4th project and explain us how that person calculated or came up with an answer. And that in the VER assessment system, that item comes with a rationale that lays out the ideas that try to explain why we think that asking this will give us information regarding the different levels of the constructs. So once we have our constructs, or the idea of what we want to measure, we have items that we think will allow us to generate evidence about that responses at different levels of performance in that construct. We go to the outcome space definition. So what we're doing in the outcome space building block is to find a set of construct relevant distinctions that are used to categorize performance that we see in each item. So what we're trying to do is make explicit how different kinds of answers to a specific item are interpreted as evidence of different construct levels. Why this particular or this type of response that the student is presenting us makes for a compelling piece of evidence to say that the student is at level 2, level 3, or level 4. So in practice, I would point out this usually leads to the generation of scoring guides for each item, such as the one that I'm presenting here. This is again for the item that I showed you, where you see that we have a guide that it says this item is able to, in principle, collect evidence for these levels of the construct. I can get either answers that are not really interpretable in terms of this particular attribute, or I can find answers that the team decided could be scored at different levels of cost 2 or cost 3. And we can see that there is an explanation of what we think we're seeing in terms of the response exemplar, what is the abstract idea of what the response is representing. And usually these things are accompanied by real examples of student responses that serve to illustrate how that abstract or general idea is instantiated in specific responses. Questions so far? Okay, so finally, we developed our idea of our construct. In our construct map, we created items, we collected responses, we elaborated these scoring guides in order to map the outcome space. And finally, we move on to a measurement model, the last building block, where we take advantage of a statistical model in order to gather that empirical evidence that so far is qualitative or ordinal, and use this statistical model to come up with an interpretation that puts both respondents and items on the same scale. And the key point here is that by using this model, we can aggregate the information we collected this far into an empirical representation of our construct. And this empirical representation of the construct is what we call the right map, that allows us to contrast our initial hypothesis regarding what was supposed to happen with the different items, what was going on with the different levels, do respondents perform at the levels we expect, do the levels and the items are ordered in the way that we wanted to or we thought they should be, should we make changes to the items, the scoring guides, or the way we approach this topic. This is an example of a right map. Some of you may know this as an item person map. This is actually a right map produced by the system, BAS, that we will be looking into a couple of minutes. So this was a very, very brief summary of the BEAR assessment system. And as I said, this is the conceptual basis that motivated us to develop the software that we will be discussing and playing with during the remainder of the workshop. Any questions or comments so far? Guys, you're starting to worry me. As a professor and teacher in the university, I know that when students say nothing, it rarely is because they are understanding me.
David, let me say, you're doing great. I'm so glad people are getting exposed to this. Just forge ahead.
I'm gonna help you out with one question there. If you have tips for students to, I know you've been through this before, to get the relationship when they are dealing with building their scoring guides and linking those to the item side of the construct. You know what I mean? Like operationalizing the evidence they actually want to look at. What would you say would help?
In general,
for them to visualize what you mean.
If I'm understanding correctly the question, how can you make the point or the connection between the different responses, how you categorize it and associate them to levels?
Yes.
So the way that I usually do it, which is not to say that I'm very successful, but the way that I find at least easy to explain and somewhat successful to convey is that the response side in this logic of inference is that if you were trying to convince someone else that this person is thinking is this way, what are the most evident things that you can imagine them saying or expressing that would make the case to you, or that you could use? You would find it like a good source of evidence to say, look, this person is not understanding at this level, it's making this kind of mistake, or it's clearly above this level. Someone will tell you that, I don't know, the mean, for instance, is influenced by outliers. Just to go back to that example, like trying to push the students to say, if you had to convince someone else, what would be a compelling statement from a student to make the point that they were at that level or below another level? That's the way that I try to convey that point. I'm not sure if you find that helpful, but that's the way that I like to think about it.
That's helpful. Thank you.
So, as I said, this is the core conceptual aspect of the system, the 4 building blocks. But now we are going to move, if other questions arise later, feel free to ask them, but I'm going to now move into the software, which is hopefully the part that you're more interested in, because we're going to be talking about that for the rest of the workshop. So the Berkeley Assessment System Software, or BAS, BAS is designed to support this entire cycle. The thing is that if you want to do assessment development using the Berkeley assessment system, that, let me tell you, is a lot of work. Most of you have discovered that the hard way. And it means keeping a lot of things in mind, keeping track of a lot of connections. It's not simply a process of scanning answers and scoring and coming up with percentages at the end. So Mark has invested a long time trying to develop a tool that will allow people to lighten the load of thinking in this way about assessment development, a system that keeps track of a lot of this stuff for you and allows you to focus on the more, let's call it, creative side of assessment development than the administrative side of assessment development. And in that sense, we've been working on BAS. That is a system that is developed as a web application. It's for those of you who are interested in Ruby and Rails. And that allows BAS to run pretty much on anything that has a modern browser and an internet connection. It obviously has some cons in comparison to what potentially could be native applications, but we really like the pros, so this is the alternative we've gone with. And the way that I will start to illustrate the relation between BAS and the assessment system, the software and the conceptual system, is that around this idea of assessment development and these 4 building blocks, we have constructed a number of modules. Starting with the construct module, moving on to the items module, which pretty neatly map to the core building blocks, then to a scoring guides module, which maps to the outcome space, and then it gets very busy because once you have items and scoring guides, you will want to assemble them into activities, which is a generic name in BAS for basically any kind of group of items that you want to deploy, either as homeworks, as formative tests, summative tests, questionnaires, anything that you want to deploy to respondents. And those activities need to be not only designed, then they need to be delivered such that people can actually interact with them online. We have the delivery module. Once you have collected the answers that you wanted to collect, then you need to score those answers, therefore the scoring module, which leads you to the calibration module that aligns pretty well with the measurement module. Here we bring into the statistical models in order to aggregate the empirical evidence we've collected so far. And finally, we have this distinction, which I know that it's not entirely intuitive, but we have the analysis module and the reports module. Here, for some of you, this may be a distinction without a difference. The point here is that reports is more oriented for, let's call it consumer consumption. If you're using BAS and you have a number of either students, teachers, stakeholders that need to see reports, we send you to the reports module. If you are the psychometrician or the conceptual expert working on understanding the assessments, we recommend you go to the analysis module. Obviously, they are very closely related, but that's the distinction that we're drawing. And conceptually, hopefully, someone will analyze the performance of the assessment before they produce the results that you show in reports. So this is the way that the system is structuring modules, trying to, again, make it easier to develop assessments using this conceptual theory behind the process. So now I want to very quickly walk you through key concepts that I already introduced, but how they are structured in BAS. This is more or less a map of the application, and I would like you to see it in this graphical way. because it will orient the way that we will conduct the activities later. So everything starts with a construct. You need to have a construct in order for the system to actually work and make sense. And again, that construct may lead you to develop items. These are two key units. We have modules in BAS to work with construct and work with items. And when a construct and an item love each other very, very much, you may want to do a scoring guide, and that will connect both of them and will allow you to illustrate, as we were talking a minute ago, to illustrate how the evidence that is generated by people answering that item connects or can be recruited as evidence for different performance levels in that construct. You probably will have more than one item to want to make several items, and those items can be aggregated into activities. Again, activity is a generic name that we're using for simply a collection of items that you at some point may want to define a time in which it will be available in order to be a scheduled activity that people can respond. When you have a scheduled activity, you will define which persons are able to answer it. And when those persons operate on that scheduled activity, you produce answers. And this is a key point that I want to make. Answers is the word that we're using for, let's call it a raw response. The answer, it's not associated to any level so far. It's not associated certainly to a numeric quantity. This is just the raw response. And now that you've done all this, you have a scoring guide and an answer that you can relate in order to generate scores. Scores is what we call in this system an answer that has been valued in some way as a piece of evidence for a particular level of the construct. So the scores are generated either by automatic algorithm in those items that can be auto-scored, that you can explain simply to the program. If the student, sorry, if the students writes 42, then it's correct. Otherwise, it's wrong. So more precisely, if otherwise it goes into this different level. Or you may need to use raters in order to look into more complex pieces of evidence in order to allocate them to different levels in the construct. We have a rating module for that. So once you have the scores, you can bring in a measurement model in order to generate a calibration. A calibration family, you will see that it's called in BAS. That is because it allows you to do many things regarding connecting different assessments, but let's call it calibration for the purpose of this workshop. Once you have a calibration, you can generate inputs from that for the analysis module or the reports module. And if you're using reports, you may want to bring in information about cut points or cut scores that will allow you to define certain bands or areas within your construct that you want to interpret as meaningful based on the construct. Finally, you may want to incorporate other outside information, mainly covariates or demographics, that will allow you to enrich the way that you present your reports or you set your reports and the way that you look at your analysis. So all this is the way that you would operate with the system if you start from the very beginning in BAS. You're doing your construct, you're doing your data collection in BAS. However, we allow you to, let's say, jumpstart the process of working with BAS by inputting from your own contrived ways external data that can be read as scores, or even you could read as answers in order to start building up from there in order to use some of the capabilities in BAS. Questions so far?
A comment, David. It might help some people just to remind them that the analysis side of it is going to be looking very much at reliability and validity. That's probably the major activity. Obviously, fit and other things like that are going to come into it as well.
Correct, exactly. The analysis side would produce evidence that you usually would associate with reliability studies or different sources of validity associated with either relation to other variables or internal structure. That's correct. And we are deploying the very initial steps for what would be now under the standard studies regarding fairness in comparing performance of the instrument on their different groups.
David, I have a quick question on the calibration family
Please.
part. Are the calibrations done within the BAS software, or are calibration values imported in from outside of the system?
50-50. To some extent, it's outside, but it's seamless to you. Our BAS servers on the backend are running their own R servers, and we rely on our packages. In particular, all that you will see today, it's done using the TAM package that it's fairly well known. It implements the MRCML in R, and it allows you to run different kind of models. So it's not our own programming. We're not coming up with the estimation algorithms, but we are calling it as part of as an internal server.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Okay, again, feel free to interrupt me. So after seeing that, let's call it map of the different things that you can do in the application, let's go back. This is again the relation between the core building blocks of the original conceptual system, and these are the modules that allow you to implement, or hopefully will make it easier for you to implement that. And you will see on the lower side of the screen a bar, which is actually on top of the application, that shows you the names of these different modules. Here I'm just illustrating that the way to think of them is on this circular nature, but the way they're represented in the bar, you start at construct, then go to items, scoring guides, activities, delivery, scoring. The import module represents those red arrows that I showed you here that allow you to inject information from outside BAS, and then you continue to doing calibration, analysis, and report. There is an additional module, the system module, which we will not be talking today, that opens a door to an entirely different area of BAS, which means how you keep track, for instance, of all the organizational structures that you are applying the assessments. If you're working with a state, that state has counties, those counties have schools, those schools have classes, those classes have teachers, those teachers have students, and we need to keep track of all that in relation to permissions, who access what, who has the ability to reset passwords, who has accounts, who gets to see each part of the system. So we are not going to go into that, but just so you know, there is a part of BAS that takes care of that. So at this point, if there are other questions, we invite you to go to and give it a shot at the system. You can go to IOMW.bearapps with that minus sign there, .com/register, and you will be asked to create an account. Please be mindful of the password you create. There are restrictions. You can always recover your password by asking the system to send you an email with a password recovery link, but for the purpose of the workshop, write it down or something like that, so you don't get lost by getting kicked out of the system. Do remember that the password requires 8 characters and that combination. The instructions are on the screen there. The system will be available after the workshop for a couple of days, let's say. We haven't decided yet, but I want to ask you that now that you get access to the infinite possibilities that BAS gives you, that you stay with the tour and follow me on the carefully selected activities. There are many things in BAS that will basically consume a lot of resources. We have around 30 people now that we will be all operating on the same server. So if any of you decides to run calibration of an instrument with 3,000 kids and 10 different constructs, that may, you know, make things slower for the rest of us. Sure, that will be the URL, IOMW.bearapps. Hopefully I'm not making a typo. .com/register. So if you guys could give me thumbs up when you are in the system or you're good to go using the reactions in Zoom. That will give me a panoramic of when to move on. If you have any questions, please let me know. I've seen only a few thumbs up, so I'm going to give a couple more minutes for people to get into the system. Yes, we are using TAM as the package for estimating models in R. Okay, I think I've seen most people. Why not conquest? Let me count the ways. I'm just going to briefly say that at the very least, I like TAM output better to parse. We can go into details later on other reasons. Okay, at this point, if anyone has a problem, please let me know. Otherwise, we're going to move forward. Okay. Thanks. So, to begin with, please be aware that there are certain files. If you want to follow on, imitate some of the examples that I'm going to give you, you can find the 3 files that we will be using in the news section on the system. Now I'm going to switch to the software. Just 1 second. No, actually, I will switch later. As I said, you should go to the news section in the BAS website, as is shown here, and you will see that there is a news note that has 3 links to 3 files that, if you are interested again in replicating what I'm going to do in the remainder of the workshop, you can use those. If you are going to do it, I recommend you download the 3 files. Are you guys seeing the 3 files, or is anyone having trouble finding them? Okay. With that, we are about to start the examples, the activities that I had planned for today. I don't know if you guys are okay continuing, or do you guys want a break? Anyone is in desperate need of a coffee or something? Oh, okay. No one seems to be objecting to continuing. I will continue then. So I have some intro slides that will explain what we're going to do now. Then I'm going to switch to the software and show you. So this is the parts that we're going to be touching on this part of the exercise. We're going to use external data in order to read scores in. We're going to calibrate them, and then we're going to generate reports by adding some cut points. And you will see to some extent how easy or hard, it depends on your perspective, it is to read some data into BAS and use it to estimate a partial credit model, and then generate some reports that you could distribute to other people that have access to the system. Everyone okay with this plan? I'm not sure what I'm asking that, because if you don't like this exercise, this is kind of too late for me to change it. So let's go. 1 second while I switch my computer. Okay, so you should be seeing now my screen. And this is the main page in BAS. You should be seeing something similar to this. Okay, so we're going to go to import. As I said in the screen, we're going to read some data. And the data that we're going to read in is located in the file that you have, that it's called activity1.csv. I'm going to actually, I think it might be a good idea to quickly show you that.
David, should we be following along and doing this?
I mean, you can if you want. There's no obligation to do so. If you're familiar with the system, this may not be that necessary. If you're new to the system, perhaps this might be more interesting. I'm quickly showing you the information that we have in activity 1 CSV. By now, if you were paying attention, you will see that these are coded as scores, and you see that each row is a student that has different levels on these 20 different questions. They are scored at different levels in COS. And one thing that I wanted to illustrate in this example is that we can input that these persons belong to different classes. I'm using classes because we are in an educational context, but this could be any kind of group, different cities, these are groups that you want to make distinctions on, which in this case are classes. You see that the structure of the file, it's pretty simple. I'm going to switch back to the import now.
Is it okay if you have empty spaces?
What do you mean by empty spaces?
I'm sorry, I mean missing data.
Yes, you can have missing data. That will be no trouble at all. So now we are going to, the system should be able to handle missing data without any problem. Just in case you have decided to follow the activity, please keep in mind that we have 3 files in the news section. You should have seen this activity 1 and these files for activity 2. Sorry, there were 4 files, not 3. We're using this one, activity 1 CSV. So I'm going to indicate that I want to, remember, this is following the VER assessment system. The construct here is key. You always want to say what it is you're making inference about at the beginning. So you want to do conceptual statistics. The system here is telling you that these are the scores that are acceptable for this construct. These are the things that you can import scores, because we are doing that and not answers. And I'm gonna call this activity name just example 1. Or this is something that we're not going to look. I'm just going to mention that in the system, you may have created another scheduled activity before, and you just want to add data to it. In that case, you can here select already existing scheduled activities, and you can add data to an activity. But in this case, we're going to create a new one. And I'm going to choose the file. You will not be able to see it, but here is just a pop-up that is asking me where is the file. This will change depending on your system. And I'm going to select the file activity01.csv. And I'm going to click review data. The system reads one of the columns and makes its best guess as to what it is that you're trying to do here. The first column, it's blank, it has no label. This is because it's a file that I exported from R, and R includes a first column with the row number. That is noise. And the system helpfully is telling me, perhaps you want to ignore this column. You can see that it gives you a number of options. It smartly selected that you want to ignore it. In order to follow me, you need to actually change nothing here. The system, and obviously I prepared the file in order to take advantage of that. It's quickly recognizing that students is something that has no meaning within the system. So it's going to create an identifier for a new student. It's going to ignore the first column. Class, it's a column that it will tell me something about that kind of grouping. And the rest of the things are information based on a scoring guide. Any questions up to this point? No? Okay. So now that I've reviewed this looks good. I'm going to do import scores. And we have our imported data. And here Bas is showing you, this is a kind of table that is a table style that you will see throughout the system. It's showing you all your data. You can look all of the files. The idea here is that you take your time to make sure that what we imported was what you wanted to import. It's telling you what are the respondent ID, the assignments, and the answers. Because it's an option that it will likely be the case, we have this shortcut here that you want to calibrate using this data. After all, there is a reason why you were importing it. Everyone who is following me is at this step so far?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So here you can, if you're here, feel free to click calibrate using this data, and this will shortcut you to a particular part of the calibration module, and you will be able to set up what you need in order to use a statistical model. In this case, if you notice, the data is polytomous in some cases. It combines polytomous and dichotomous information. So we are going to name this calibration activity 01 calibration. It's telling me it's for the construct COS, cost, conceptions of statistics. I have some options. I'm not going to dwell alone on it, but we give you some options of how to code NAs or how you define how to treat the blank level, whether you combine each one of the sub-levels in a construct or treat them separately. Just leave them as it is by default. You have the option of filter some scoring guides, meaning leave some of the items outside the calibration if you want to. And here it's showing you, and this is very important, on top you see each one of the levels of the construct, here in this row, and here, in the first row, and for each one of the other rows, and you have the items. Sorry, someone is asking, the scoring guide is descending, not ascending. I'm not sure what you mean by that. Could you elaborate? Oh, okay. So, excellent. Here is a very important point. I told you that we distinguish between answers, which is, again, something like a raw response, and a score, which is an answer that has been valued at a construct level. A separate thing is the numeric mapping that we do in order to incorporate this data into a statistical model. And that mapping will vary depending on the available responses for each item. So this table here is showing you an important piece of information that is telling you, look, for this particular item, things that are at this level will be valued using this number. If you are interested in the way that the model is being estimated, this is an important piece of information and it may help you diagnose something that may not be turning out the way that you want to. And below, it's again showing you, once you take this mapping, how the data will look for each one of your items. This is your entire data set that has been mapped to the numeric scores that you need in order to estimate the model. Notice here that if you want, you can always export to an Excel or a CSV file, either the mapping or your newly recoded data. Once you take a look at this, you confirm that everything looks good, you can hit the button calibrate. And here I'm crossing my fingers that not all of you are going to calibrate exactly at the same time. I'm going to warn you, if we try to give a lot of resources to a server, if all of you calibrate and the system cannot deal with it, it may show you an error. We think that that's just for a couple of seconds. You should be able to hit back and then move on. Tell me, guys, how is it, if it's working for you?
Yes, it's working. Thank you.
Yes, I confirm.
Excellent.
Thank you.
If everything worked okay, you should now be looking at a brand new right map that's showing you how the people that we just read into the system are distributed according to their estimates in this partial credit model. As I mentioned, you can see there are some items that are dichotomous, like this first item, which only has one step here, according to and others that have 3 categories like this one, and others that have 4 categories like the third question. Everyone is here, the ones that are following along?
Yes.
Okay. So now I'm gonna ask you to hit see more. This will take you to a summary of the calibration. Here you have a lot of details regarding how it went. And I want to highlight 2 things. One, you are able to download the R data file at the very bottom. If you are interested in continue playing with the calibration, do some more advanced stuff, you don't like the plots, you want something different, you want to really look into what happened in the estimation, you can download the R data file for this calibration, and that will allow you to look at the estimation at your heart's content. In this case, what I'm going to ask you to do is go on the upper part here and click on View at Cut Points. And you should get into this screen. And in this screen, we're going to actually click Add Cut Points. So cut points, they're fairly easy to create. We're going to name this. No, I'm going to give this name. You can give any name that you want. I'm going to call this cut point for workshop data, activity 01. A lot of parts in BAS have a section that's called description or supplemental information. Remember, as I said at the beginning, that the idea of this system is to help you keep track of a lot of information. And the idea of all these descriptions is for you to enter information that will allow you to remember what are important points or aspects of how the information that you're writing was generated. So for instance, here I have some text prepared. This is all fictitious. That these cut points were generating in a meeting that took place these and these days, that what kind of evidence was reviewed, and the people that participated in that meeting in order to generate these cut points. And I'm going to just type, and I'm going to do this fairly slow so you guys can follow up and reproduce it. I'm going to start with NL2, which I know is the lowest level that was observed, and I'm going to say that the lower bound is -3. And the upper bound of this level is -2. Then I'm going to go to cost 1, and I'm going to say that this starts at -2 and moves to -0.5. From then, I'm going to move to cost 2, and I'm going to say that cost 2 goes from -0.5 to 1. If you want to try other numbers, you may try other numbers. I'm just showing you the configuration that I had tried before. Here, cost 3 will go from 1 to 2. And finally, cost 4 will go from 2 to 3.5. Just going to leave this on the screen for a minute. So if you want to reproduce this, again, you can try any. For the purpose of this, this particular calibration, I encourage you to only put cut points for the overall levels, not the sub-levels. You can see here that cost 2 has sub-level A and B. Any questions so far?
Yes, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Sorry, man, it's been a long day after 7 hours of work. Where do you get the cut scores from? How?
Ah, interesting. Let's just say that for the purpose of this workshop, we decided not to do a mini standard setting exercise. The cut points come from some kind of outside process that you either can have. This is the part that the calibration family works. If you, for instance, have been using a unified scale for all of your assessment through an item bank through several years, your calibration may be calibrated into that family. So you know that the scores that you're using are into a scale that has been used before, And in the past, you may be inheriting some cut scores that you've been using, for instance, from a described variable, PISA style, or something along those lines. But your question is a good one. We don't have a system to, I mean, strictly speaking, you can do some algorithmic ways in order to generate cut points using the levels, but those are not implemented on the system. You need to decide which areas of the variable you're going to highlight with different cut scores. I don't know if that answers your question.
Maybe it was the question. Maybe the answer's fine. But you're assuming that you've had a cut score study, you've got all these SMEs, these judges, right?
Yes.
So what's my assumption? They looked at the items and what? They said yes, no, and then you ran it, and then you got the data. I don't understand your 2 and 3.5 based on your judges.
Harry,
Yeah, sorry, that's
Harry?
this is a good question. I just want to illustrate that in order to present the plots that I'm going to show you, you need to have some of the plots. You need to have done this kind of study before. So let's just
David, let me just say
go.
something. Harry, I'm going to put a paper in the chat that actually describes this process we use, and it uses the right maps to try and set levels. So don't ask David to do it right now. It'll take the rest of the
Just trying to follow.
But have a look at the paper I'm putting in the chat, and you'll see some ways of doing this. It's a PDF, so you should be able to get it.
Thanks,
Sorry
Mike.
to interrupt there, David.
It's a good question. Let me put it this way. If this was a cooking program, this is the part where I just suddenly appear with something out of the oven that should have taken like 5 hours, and now it's ready. So I'm going to, having input that information, I'm going to create the cut point set. And having done all this, I'm going to move to reports. And in reports, you now see that available is our new example. Example 1 for Construct COS that has 150 students. They are all these scores. This is not surprising because we inputted only score data, so all of it is scored. And we can see 2 kinds of available options: view reports and export data. We're going to go into view reports. And here you get this summary table that shows you all the available reports that you have for this calibrated data. The first one, answers, it's empty because obviously you did not collect answers in the system, nor you uploaded them. You started at the score level. So you go to answers, you will simply see that it is empty. However, you did read in scores, so you can get access to the scores report, which very briefly shows you, in this case, notice that we have, this is an embedded data set, we have 150, everyone responded everything. There's no missing data. That's why they are all the same level. And you can see how many, for each one of the items, how many answers, scores are for each one of the levels. If you fly over or roll over the legend, you see that it highlights each one. This is not only nice, if you want to just make a plot of the responses at the upper level, you will see that they are only on question 6. If you want to see for question 3, you will see that you can basically interact with the legend in order to use it in different ways. You can see graphs for each one of the 20 items that we imported in terms of absolute value, in percentages here, and in tables, which if you're a teacher, this might be useful because we tell you exactly which student scored at which level in which item. And you may find that information useful if you're doing management of a small group. Obviously, if you're this a large scale assessment and you have 5,000 people, this report will be less useful. Okay, so after looking at simply the reports of frequencies, we can go to the individual scores. This is a report. This is an assessment that had a single dimension, cost, and here we're showing you for each one of the students. I'm going to pick student 141, and it's summarizing how that particular student answered in each one of the items. This is an individual report. On top, it's telling you these are the different construct levels. If you want to know what they mean, you can always look at the information for the construct, which, oh, I thought that that was going to show the scoring guide. Usually, if you have the items in the system, if you were working in BAS and you collected data in BAS, by clicking on the question, it would show you the item that you're looking for each person. However, we just imported the scores, so we have no access to the items. So anyway, this is an individual report that you may find useful if you're looking for a particular person. But if you're looking for the group information, you may prefer to go into the right map. We already seen the overall right map, but this is a nice feature. When we imported the data, we read classes in. We know that 150 students are aggregated in 3 different classes, and we can click here, see right map by classes, and it will automatically create each right map for each one of the teachers, which you can then use to give feedback or share with them. Questions so far?
I'm sorry, David. Is there a Spanish version of this app?
No, not so far.
Okay, thank you.
The system can be translated. What we do have, it's a working version of the. This is something that I'm not going to show today. Oh, sorry, no, we actually will see part of the interface when you are taking a test. We have built BAS such that it is translatable, but we have only translated the part that is student facing or respondent facing. So you, as long as you know English or understand enough of the system, you can set up surveys or tests and you can deploy them, and the respondents will see them in Spanish, for instance, but the backend has not been translated. Though I will point out again, it's not because it's impossible or hard, it's just in terms of technical terms, it's just hard that someone needs to actually do the translation of the terms.
Sure, thank you.
David, is it possible in the prior screen and in this screen to see the items in difficulty order?
That's a good question, and I'm afraid that so far we have not implemented ordering of items. That's a good point. I don't seem to remember that being requested, so I'm going to make a note of that because that's pretty reasonable. Sorting of items. Just give me a second here.
David, it looks like that last function just separates the persons by classroom, by group. Is that all that it's doing, or is there other things going on?
Yes, no, that's precisely the point, that it will allow you to, again, remember we are in the reporting section. The idea here is that you're generating things that you may want to share with people who are stakeholders outside of the system. And if you have just run a test for in a school for different teachers, you may want to share particular reports for each one of them. Okay, so far the reports that we've been looking at have not made use of the cut scores. So if you didn't have cut scores, you should be able to see this without problem. But if you do have cut scores, you can take advantage of the following 2 reports, which they segment the scale into the areas that you signal with the cut scores, presumably based on some kind of standard setting procedure that you have performed. And here you can see for a specific student, where are they located and their standard error of the estimation. You can potentially download the PDFs, although I'm not sure if we are enabled that on this server. Again, this is just for a single individual report. Perhaps more interesting is the group proficiency report, in which for each class, we are presenting you all of the students in your class, showing you how they are located, their names, their estimates, their standard errors, and you can see how they vary in the different class on the different levels.
This is fantastic, David. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, so again, in this server we didn't enable we have capabilities to, well, obviously you can always print this directly, but you could, there are other servers in which have enabled exporting PDFs. And a final report, it's the kit map. This is a more, let's just say, technical or specific report. You need to, this is something that whoever looks at it needs to understand what's going on with the model in order to more fully understand what is going on. This report is showing you the extent that the person's responses are consistent with the predictions of the model. I'm not gonna go into a lot of detail explaining here, but I'm just gonna say that the lower left corner and the upper right corner are what the model would have predicted, and items located in the upper left or lower right are items that are, or responses that are not consistent with the expectation on the model. This can be very busy, so one thing that we allow you to do is to present the Zoom. Examine this with Zoom. You can just scroll here and it will zoom into to allow you to see in more detail what is going on with the different responses. You can reset the Zoom and you can go back to the map. This provides very interesting diagnostic information. It's a way of looking at person fit, if you want to think of it that way, but you need to have an understanding of the model and why does it make sense to present these predictions or not. So a lot of the student has a lot of these items that make sense. This is what the model would have predicted, but he got wrong these items which the model would have assumed that he or she should have gotten correct. Those are the reports that so far are available in BAS, geared towards sharing general performance results of the students. I'm going to quickly show you another assessment that has more than one dimension, this ADM assessment. If you go into view reports, some of them make a little more sense. For instance, if you go to individual proficiency, you will see that for a single student, we are showing you where it is, where he is estimated to be in each one of the different constructs that were assessed on that particular instrument.
Is that
Can you get it some? Oh, go ahead.
Is that one standard error or two on the error bars, David?
I believe we're doing one standard error.
Okay.
And David, do you have any functionality? I think the answer is no, but to do summary kid maps for groups of students, maybe by classroom, where we don't just have the right map or the levels display, but we can see differential item functioning in at a subgroup level for a classroom or for the boys versus the girls or whatever.
I'm gonna put a pin on that because we're gonna move at the last thing that we're gonna do. We're gonna look at the analysis, and there we have contrast between groups.
Thank you.
This is the first, the first part. I think that perhaps a short recess, 5 minutes, would be in order. But I want to make sure. I don't know if there are any questions, comments, or complaints again at this point.
David, a question. Is it possible to check the, for example, the capability to discriminate, the difficulty of the item? Do you have a summary of those after you collect the information?
We, as I said, we're going to close this workshop with a look into the analysis tab. We provide classical test theory summary statistics, so you or some version of that. You can, if you're looking into the traditional understanding of discrimination, I believe that the summary tables present a correlation between the responses and the WLE estimates, which it's akin to what would usually be the biserial or point biserial discrimination information. But in terms of the latent variable models, the IRT models that we're running, we are moving exclusively with Rash family models that assume a common slope parameter for all of the items.
Thank you.
Okay, if there are no other questions, let's reconvene in 5 minutes. That would be, I want to say 3:20, but that would be for you guys 10:20 if I'm not mistaken. I mean, at least on the standard time that we did for California? Okay. Talk to you in a couple of minutes.
La grabación se ha detenido.
Okay, so we're back. I'm gonna also do a follow-up and a couple of questions regarding Harry's question. I'm going to share another, or at least I'm gonna try to share another potentially helpful chapter, or no, in this case, a paper on the how you could go about setting the cut scores. There was also a question by Josh. And there was a question by Josh regarding the reliability. I'm going to show that in more detail later on too, but just so you know, when we run the calibration, one of the first pieces of information that it shows you is the reliability based on APs and WLEs. I'm not sure if everyone is back, so perhaps we could use this couple of minutes to address any questions, comments. Okay, so let's continue.
I did have a question, David. In the right map, were you showing steps or thresholds?
By default, the right maps show thresholds, if I'm not mistaken.
Good. Okay.
Okay, so the next activity that we're going to do is show you a
Esta
little bit.
reunión está siendo grabada.
Okay, so the next activity will allow you to see a little bit about how you work with activities in BAS, how you deliver them. You're gonna, if you're interested, be able to take a look at how a respondent would approach BAS, and I'm gonna show you, in a sense, the relations of the different things that are in this part of the diagram. We're gonna talk about items, schedule activities, persons, and the answers. And again, we're going to briefly show you a couple of activities. There's a question. Okay. Sorry, there was a question. If you need to look at the files that we were using in this particular example that we're going to do now, you're not going to need a file. But if you need them, you can go to the news section, which you can access by going to the upper right corner of BAS, where is your username. You will see news. Sorry. And within news, you will see two posts that have the 4 files that we will use. We already use activity 1, and there are other 3 files that we will use later on. Okay. So, and as I was saying, this example, we will use some activities. You're going to log in using the auto-enroll capability that BAS offers. That means that you can just leave a link that people can go to and access the survey without having to have an account previously created, which is another option that some projects use. And in this particular activity, we're going to enable a feature that can have at least 2 uses, I would say. One of them is that you could potentially deploy activities to respondents, allowing them to give you feedback if you are interested in. But it was originally developed to allow to help the assessment development process. Let's say that you're working on an initial draft of an instrument and you want input from your co-PIs, or you want to get input from disciplinary experts. So you can share the activity in the way that a respondent would see it but allow them to give you comments regarding each one of the specific items. And I'm going to show you how you can collect that and see that in BAS in order to use it for assessment development. So we'll go back now to the software. So we're back in BAS. As I was saying, Josh, the reliability is shown in the calibrations at the very beginning. And we go to activities. I'm going to briefly show you first to highlight, notice that if you follow with me and imported the data, you have now an activity that is named the way that you named your import. I named it example 1. This activity, just stands in there because BAS needs a way to keep track that you imported certain scores that were supposed to be associated to an activity. But notice that this activity is empty because obviously you never created the items that activity should have within BAS. On the other hand, the other 2 activities that you will see there are activities that are created as part of BAS. So if you click preview, for instance, in the ADM activity, you will go into the view that students would have. I'm going to make this a little bigger here. So in this activity, we have some demographic information at the beginning, and you can navigate the activity and move into the different questions that are part of this assessment. You will notice that the activity has, among other things, a list of questions here that allows you to jump into any one of the questions. And another feature that we have is that once you have answered in one of the questions, and if you look here, oh no, sorry, did we remove that? We used to mark the completeness with the circle. Perhaps I missed when we removed that. It was a nice feature. Okay, so you can see the lines there to navigate, and this is a full assessment that has items of the different constructs that were assessed by the ADM project. This is just an example. I want you to look at in activities in particular the activity that's called unscored activity. You can preview it here. You can see there are many things that you can do. You can print it a PDF, just print it. You can share it. You can create a link to show it to other people that are outside of BAS, edit it, duplicate it, etc. Here we're just going to focus on preview. And you will see that this is a very small activity. It's basically one single bundle of items. You have a common stimulus here, these 2 graphs, and we have 6 questions. I think that some of them are closed response and some of them are open response. Oh, okay. They are telling me that the reason why the list of questions was not updated in that particular example is because it's only updated in the cases that students are actually registered, not on this particular preview that we are using. When the response is recorded, the little circle next to a question, it's filled in. That way the student can keep track what things he has answered and what things are left to answer. Okay, so if you look at this activity, this is what I will ask you to respond to. Basically, I'm going to ask you to log into a different address, so you get to see what a student sees, and you get to log in, and you will be able to see the questions, answer them, and look at the feedback feature that it's enabled there. So just give me a second to show you the address. Here. You should be seeing now an address available in the screen. I'm going to paste it on the chat. Oh, no, we already did. Okay. if you go to that address, you should see this screen. It says BAS student tools. You can sign out, and you can see that there is one activity available for you. It says that there are 3 days remaining, and you can begin the activity. The way that this is set up, we're asking you for your email address. Again, the way that I'm doing this example, it's to illustrate that you can collect feedback. And for the feedback, it's important to usually know who is giving you the feedback. So I'm just going to do and I'm going to log in. And you will be able to see what a student usually would see when they are looking at an activity, which is the list of questions and the opportunity to answer them. But you will also see these little bubbles of speech that you can click on, and you can add a comment regarding each part of the activity in order to provide feedback. So for all of you who are actually following and went into this activity to respond it, I would ask you to quickly answer it, because later on we're going to look into scoring. The close response, type something on the display, and if you feel like it, leave a couple of comments for giving feedback to each question or some of the questions. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to interact with the activity that we have there. If you guys can give me a thumbs up when you're ready, so I can get a general sense of, okay. Okay, so just so you know, one thing that is important is that once you click finish in the test, well, it will ask you to confirm that you want to submit your answers. And then you should click sign out, because at the moment when you went there, you were logged in as this temporary user. So if you try to go back to IOMW oh no, this is a different server. I'm not sure if that will interact. If you go back to IOMW, apps.com, you may need to log in again. I will give you a second to go back there. That's why it's important to remember your password. Okay, so are you guys ready to continue?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So you saw, you saw the activities tab. You saw that examine an activity. On the back, I made it available using the delivery screen. If you go to delivery, you can see that scoring example is available between February 6 and February 11. I can see here that there are 59 completed tests. That's 50 that we loaded. By the way, you guys should see 5000, because in your servers, you only have the responses that we preloaded. But because you guys logged into my server in order to respond, I see that 9 people fully answered the activity. 10 people started it, but not finished it. And 7 persons did not start the activity. That basically logged in, but they did not answer anything on it. Okay, so with this information, I can go in this delivery tab, I can go to this little, and this is something that you guys, again, will not be able to see because you only gave feedback on my server. But in these bubbles, text bubbles, you can see here that some people, well, at least one people left this comment, Yuki, actually about the statue 2. And if anyone else had left feedback here, you could download it to an Excel or a CSV file in order to review your items and take into account those comments. Here, well, that's information about the item, etc. But this is where you would download feedback that was given to your test. Now, moving to scoring, here you see that in our scoring example, this activity, we have people who have completed it, other started it and not started. This is updated from the couple of moments ago when I was in delivery. And I have the possibility to select an item to score or select a scoring guide to score. I'm not going to go into this distinction at the moment. I'm just going to go with select an item in this case. And I see here each one of the items that were part of the activity. And for each one, I get 3 options. I can access one of these options for scoring. So I'm going to start with this lower score, and I'm going to start with the little like inbox that you see here. If I click on that, I'm going to go to what we call the box scoring interface, in which you can see, in this case, we're showing you the combination of 2 answers that people gave. And you can score by looking at that, grabbing it, and dropping it into a level. The system automatically detects that other people have exactly the same pattern. And it's asking me, do you want to score those people with exactly the same pattern in the same way? And I'm going to say yes. It will take a second. And it classified the people in that level, which you can see now here. If I go back to unsorted, I want to grab this, and I want to say that this is an MRC2B level, and I can continue dragging and dropping different responses here, and I can use the screen to score observed responses. If I have questions regarding the levels, I can look at the details of the scoring guide that shows me examples if I have loaded them and descriptions of the levels. And I can skim through the different responses. And if I really want to, I can see who answered which one of the questions. Questions so far? Comments?
David, I have a quick question. How easy or difficult? I know these panels, the student response panels are ordered by probably the ID that BAS assigns. Is there a way to sort by what students selected? So for example, all the people who chose A comes up first, and so forth. Is there how easy or difficult to program that into this interface?
We could look into it. We do not have anything like that. The thing is that most of the things that would be as easily structured are things that you would probably do auto score. I mean, you could sort alphabetically in an open-ended response, but I'm not sure that that would necessarily be that helpful, but it's in principle possible to implement.
Okay, that's great to know.
As I said, there are different scoring ways to score data. One of them is also, I already showed you the box one. The other one is student by student. This is something along the logic of a teacher or someone who has a class and grades their students. You can look at one student response and then go to the next one and then to the next one. This screen is inspired in that logic of scoring or grading. You have one question, and within the same question, you move student to student, and you have access to all the students or respondents that access that activity. And finally, you can access as a final interface a view that shows you an entire bundle. In this case, you can see all the responses that a person gave to that particular question. So I'm going to go, for instance, I'm going to enter. I did not answer a lot. Yeah, no. So I can see here all of my non-answers in this case, and I could decide, well, all these are missing. Let me look for a student that has something in them. Looking at all of the questions that and how that person answered, I can go here and select, I think this is an emergency 4, this is an ML2, and I can score, basically think of it as looking at the entire test and not a single question. So those are the 3 interfaces that we have for scoring. Now, moving to something that might be more interesting because it's usually more challenging, we have the option to do rater assignments. If you have a lot of open-ended scoring to do and you have multiple raters, you can select, I'm going to do here and do assignment of raters. Here, you can select certain items that you want to assign to your raters. Here in the system, you can have a kind of user that is a rater and select them. And if you want to, you can just say, you know what, I want to use these 4 raters, create a rater structure that gives me 30% of double scoring. And the system automatically will assign the totality of the evidence that need to be rated and will ensure that there is a 30% of overlap between the raters in order for you to have that percentage of double scoring, which is a fairly quick way of doing the assignment. However, and I don't know if there are questions about this in particular. I want to show you an example that the system at the moment automatically allows you to do this like overall percentage, but we also have the possibility of creating very specific rater designs. And I'm going to show you that in a slide. Give me 1 second. You can import a file that defines a more complex rater design. And I'm going to show you that right now. If you want a specific design that says this rater should view this particular piece of evidence, these 2 raters should rate simultaneously this piece of evidence, you can create a CSV file that it's like the one here, which by the way is inspired by some of the files that Jared and Yuki have been using. Here you can see that each row is a particular test that a particular student took. And in this case, I'm showing you that I have 3 raters that are indexed by their IDs. I have rater 363, 3673, 3674, and 3675. So if I create a CSV file, I can say that I want just rater 3673 to score item A for this student in this assignment. However, I can assign double scoring by listing the 2 raters for that particular item, or even triple scoring. You can see how this allows you to do any kind of rating design that you want. You can really micromanage your rating assignment. The advantage of this is that if you have your answers in BAS or you collected data in BAS, you just import this rating design and the system automatically allocates the evidence. The raters can only access the evidence that they were assigned, and you can keep track of what was rated in which scoring session. So hopefully that for those of you who work with a lot of open-ended responses, this may give you some facilities to more quickly and seamlessly organize that scoring process. Questions so far before we move on to the last and main part of the system, of the activities that we're going to.
And I would just add that we would use this very specific type of design because when we're assigning these responses, we want to make sure that we're getting good examples of the different types of responses that would be scored at one level versus another. So just one way to make sure that you're covering like the breadth of kind of the construct levels in student responses.
Yes, as Jared was saying, and well, you guys have used extensively this for scoring training, which we think it's a helpful application of this kind of micro control. Any other comments? One thing that I did not mention that I just been reminded is that in the system, you can define auto-scoring. What I'm showing you now are the facilities to rate open-ended responses where we don't have auto-scoring. But on the other hand, for items that have a closed structure, you can define algorithms of source scoring. And in those cases, you can see that there is this little magic wand that will allow you to run auto-scoring routine that you have previously defined in the system if your item allows it. We allow to score for most of our closed format items, and we now have a syntax that allows you to concatenate items. So you could simultaneously auto-score two multiple choice. Like you need to have answered this on this one and this on this other multiple choice in order to have this level. Basically, you can do combination of closed response items in order to assign different levels.
That's great.
Yeah.
William?
And David, because you're assigning raters in the way you had on the previous screen, does that imply then you could have multifaceted models?
Yes, we have not. Well, first of all, those are certainly estimable in R. There are a number of packages that allow you to do something like facets or LLTM. So in principle, we can add them. And yes, this allows you to have all the information you need to input into the model in order to estimate rater effects.
Thank you.
At the very least, I would say that at the moment you can extract the information that you can use to run on your own. And if someone requests it and there is enough interest, we can incorporate it into the system. Okay. So, 1 second. Okay, at the moment, we just finished implementing the whole rating. So at the moment we have organized the rating. We allow you to create different scoring sessions. We have not yet added consistency indices to each one of the sessions, but that is actually not hard to do. Like the hard part was creating the whole structure for scoring sessions. In the coming let's just say weeks or months, we will continue adding, and one of the first things on the list is adding some sort of index of consistency between the raters.
Great.
Okay, so let's continue. So, and this is the this is a part that has a lot of different aspects to show. We are going to finally visit the analysis section. So in terms of the diagram that I had shown you at the beginning, we are going to again load up external scores, calibrate them, go into analysis, and use some of the covariates to see what are the features that BAS offers on when you're working like this. And the example that I'm going to show you is an example where I have data for a pre-test and a post-test. And both the pre-test and the post-test have two forms. The forms have some items in commons and some items that are specific for each form. So we are going to load into BAS the pre-test data, the post-test data, and the person covariates, which is another file of information I have about the students. And we're going to see how we can use this in the system to run some analysis on the different instruments. And yes, so let's get right on that. We are going to go back to import. And here you will need the three files again in news. These three files, pre-test, post-test, and covariates. We are going to start by reading in conceptual statistics or pre-test that I'm helpfully going to name pre-test activity 02 and choose that file, the one that's called pre-test. I'm going to review the data. Here again, I gave it the name external ID, which BAS, again, I could have given it another name and selected manually, but for BAS, this means I am giving you a key to identify the students that is a key that I created, not a key that is within BAS, but I want you to keep track of it because I will refer to the same student using the same key in other files. So this is the external ID. It has identified that I have the word, remember, in this case, I don't have a class, I have a form. It has helpfully identified that I have an activity form column, and the rest of the 30 items that I have in that file are being detected. I'm going to say import scores. However, because I have two forms, BAS will ask me to indicate which items go in which form. And because of the structure of the data, BAS has detected that form A has items 1 to 20, with 21 to 30 not being in form A, and that form B has items 11 to 30, with the first 10 items not in there. So this is the structure I told you, two forms in the pretest with some common items, in particular the items between the 11 and the 20. Am I making sense? Am I going too fast with this?
You're making sense, but I have a question, David.
Go ahead.
So how does BAS know that you have two forms? Is there a way you have to format your Excel sheet before you're importing it? That
I'm gonna go back and show you how many forms. It's actually pretty easy because I'm gonna do consequence statistics. This is the practice activity. If you look into the import, you will see that I had a column that was called form. I could have called it pineapple, and later BAS would have not have known that it was form, and I could have still told it, look, this column has information about activities or forms. So because that column was present, then BAS knows that you have it.
Okay,
I'm going to show you the structure of the file now, to that perhaps will make it clearer. Give me 1 second, please. To change the sharing. I have on screen now the pretest information. You see here that I have student 1 who answered the pretest form A, and it has a bunch of NAs. Those allowed BAS to detect that that was the case. Notice that because I have two forms and I want to do alternate forms reliability, in this particular pretest, I also have student 1, and I made it answer the fictitiously all simulated data. Again, in this different form, all these items again, and you can see that in the second form, there are no data here. So by looking at the column form, BAS inferred that there is a form A and a form B, and by looking at the NA structure, it's trying to do the best guess of what items go in which form. I don't know if that answers your question.
yes, it does. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, so I'm gonna continue here, importing the scores. So BAS correctly figured out what are the different assignments to the forms, and I'm ready to create the form and import the scores. We have the same as we saw before, but now we are not going to calibrate right away. We're going to import scores again because we want to import a post test. I select the post test file. Again, I review the data. It's the same, like the same structure of 30 questions that now in a post test, 2 forms. I asked it to import. it asks me again to confirm this post-test file has the same structure, but again, identifies it correctly, and I import. And finally, I'm going to import covariates. I'm going to say that I'm going to import it to the pretest activity, but however, keep in mind that the covariates will be associated with the student ID, because in this example, I have the same students in the pretest and the post-test. When I import the covariates for the pretest, they will also be available for the students in the post-test. I select the covariates and ask to review the data. And it's telling me there's an external ID, which is important. It's what will allow me to link it to the information I had before. And it tells me that it has 3 covariates. And here I want to indicate that gender should be treated as quantitative and school and gender as categorical. And I'm going to import the covariates. Having done all the importing of the information, we are ready to calibrate. And here we're going to use a different option than we did last time. We're going to go to calibration and create new. Again, calibration, create new. And here we have data that can be calibrated. We have our pre-test and post-test. And I'm going to, instead of clicking just calibrate, which is just a circle, I'm going to use the circle that has a little person in it. I'm going to say calibrate using demographic. And I am going to calibrate in particular using gender. I get to see again the screen that tells me what is going to happen in this calibration. For the sake of simplicity, in this example, we only have dichotomous items. The mapping is very simple, and it's showing me here the data for the mapping. And if you want, you can view the full data set, view the data set just for the subset of female, or the data set just for the subset of male, which is the data available in this simulated data set. I'm going to just calibrate it. This is the same procedure more or less than we did and this exercise at the very beginning. However, because I'm calibrating by demographic, we will see that it actually will run 3 calibrations. It will run the full data set and for each one of the subgroups. So we get a right map for the entirety, sorry, for the male group, for the female group, and for the entirety of the sample that we inputted. I'm gonna calibrate now, repeat the process for the post-test. Again, calibrate using demographic, gender, I'm gonna add a name that allows me to identify it later. I'm just gonna calibrate it. And we have all results for the, again, all the samples, subgroup 1, subgroup 2. Having done all these calibrations, we can go to the analysis screen. And here you have all the information, all the available calibrations that you may be interested in looking into. Notice that in your data sets, if you did not follow along and you want to look at results, you can look at the ADM calibrations that have already been done for the different groups with subgroups. So you can, even if you did not follow me in doing the import and the calibrations, you can take a look at these ADM calibrations in order to see the same kind of reports that I will be showing. So let's start with very quickly the options for reliability, in particular the alternate form or test retest. Because we know that the pretest had 2 forms, we can do alternate forms by selecting just the pretest and say analyze. and I see that I have 2 forms, and I just select 2 forms. I could have 4 forms, and then I need to do pairs, but I have 2 forms. I say use those 2 forms, and it will show me a graph, and we see that we have a 0.84 correlation between form A and form B during the pretest. If I want to, I can download the proficiencies that I use for this in order to do further analysis directly to an Excel file here. The same thing can be done for the post-test. You will see, I can select the post-test here, analyze. Again, I have form 1 and form 2. And this one has a slightly lower correlation. There's a 0.76 correlation between form A and form B in the post-test. But I also can do a test-retest analysis, and I can select the pre-test and the post-test. And it will tell me that I have students in common. And in this case, the stability over time in this simulated example is lower. I have only a 0.5 correlation between the pre-test and the post-test for the students. So because we structure the data in the import with forms and in different schedule activities, we get access to this analysis that allows us to correlate the different forms and times. Questions?
Yeah, David, could you use different colors or symbols for students in different classrooms?
We have not crossed this particular feature with classes, but that's actually possible. That's no problem. We could do it for different classes, yes.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Again, this is a very simple analysis. It's just that Bas is making, Mark has been using an earlier version of this, I think, for his class. This, for people who are starting doing psychometric analysis, this is helpful. It's fairly easy to do if you structure your data adequately. Okay, so this was this particular analysis of reliability, but let's take a look at the other analysis that are available in BAS. I'm gonna pick the pretest and take a look at the plots that we make available for you. To begin with, you get access to a text write map. This is a fan favorite of Mark. You can copy it and paste this to any text file in order to manipulate it as at your heart's content. And this is just let's call it the classical map that it's available, for instance, in Conquest when you generate it, another Rash software. We give you access to the fit plot that it's showing you the infit and outfit for the assessment that you're working with. In this particular case, because I generated the data, it turns out that there are no statistically significant outliers. So even if you were to select here that you want to highlight fit issues, you will see none of them, because even if you look here, it's telling you that the p value for the test that is 0.06, even though it's quite farther away. Anyway, you can, this is the classical fit statistic information that you get in programs for Rash analysis. The item characteristic curves, the system will show you all the item characteristic curves at the same time. That's a little hard to read. So what you can do is hide all of them. We're working on this, the hide all is not as fast as it should, but once you hide all of them, I will show you why that makes sense. You can click on each one in the label and you can see the different items and look at both the theoretical item characteristic curve given by the line and the empirical data and the fit that it has to the theoretical prediction. You can do that for all of the items by just clicking on them on the legend. Any questions? Yeah.
Well, David, yes. Again, I know that this is drilling down a bit, but if you've got a LLTM or a multifaceted model, could you then contrast the theoretical and empirical, across raters or across predictors?
I mean, again, this is in principle possible, but that is farther along because we would first need to implement the radar model, which and it's not difficult in itself, but it's something that we would need to add the options to do it, and then we would need to edit this. But in principle, it's doable, as we would just need to generate the theoretical prediction by the model and then contrast the same empirical results.
Thank you.
Oh, and one thing that I should point out, let me go back to the item characteristic curve and the fit plot too in that case. Here, all of our graphs have this little menu here. You can download the plots as PNGs, SVGs, or PDFs, or just directly printed. That is available for all the graphics within the system. I already showed you the kid map. It's the same features than the last time. You can take a look here and see the result for each one of the students. You get the empirical error curves, meaning we get the EAP errors, in this case, for each one of all of the observed students. In this case, we did not have missing data, so this is sort of a moot point, but if you have missing data, you can request that it only shows the proficiencies of people with full data in order to get a nicer curve and not the cloud that you would get if you get different patterns of missing data. The reciprocal of that curve, the information curve. And I'm going to skip this to show it in a different, I'm going to go to person estimate by covariates. Here, the information that we added, it's incorporated. I can ask for a plot that relates age first with the results in the test. I can also do categorical covariates, for instance, school, and it will show me box plots for each one. Or, and if you are curious, you can combine two, and I could wonder what is the relation with two categorical covariates, and it will automatically combine them and show me the box plots for each one of the combinations of the two female or male groups within each one of the schools. This also works for the quantitative one, although we are still working on that. It's showing you just the spread for each one of those. Later on, we're going to add the two fit lines to this to make it more useful.
David, just to clarify for some people who don't necessarily work in education, the terminology, the background references don't necessarily have to be to students' classrooms and schools, right? It could be patients, hospitals, clinics.
The covariate can be anything. Like right. As I said, we imported, I guess I didn't show that file, but you can, I'm going to quickly show that. The structure of the covariate file is very simple, and you can read in any covariate that you want. I'm going to quickly show this. So this is the simplest of all the files. We have the ID of the student, and then we had age, gender, and school. This could have been county, treatment or control, any kind of characteristic of the person that you find it relevant. If you had scores for other tests that you had applied before, you could import them here too. So it can really be used for any information that you think it's pertinent to be related to the results of your assessment.
Thank you again.
And finally, we're starting to develop the differential item functioning. At the moment, it's the most basic analysis that you can do. And that is because we did it by gender and we have two calibration, it's showing us the variability of the difficulties of the items depending on each one of the calibrations. I'm going to quickly show you in the ADM calibration, which is one that you may have been following if you did not run the analysis yourself. There are other two things that might be interesting. One is the feature of empirical versus theoretical difficulties. On the in the Bear assessment system, you are encouraged to have hypotheses regarding what are the levels of performances or difficulties that the items have. So you can input that into the system. You can load those theoretical predictions of the difficulty of your items, and this will allow you to rank, correlate that ranking of difficulties with the empirical results. More generally, this feature can be used to, you can create a different ranking here. We will show you all the items. You can basically use this to generate a correlation of your items with any variable, as long as you input the values that you want to correlate them. And finally, there is a graph for, this is in particular useful for polytonous assessments, in which for each one of the levels, we are showing you the difficulties to see if there is this nicely stepped order that you would expect in some cases, or there is no clear pattern on the order of the different steps and the empirical results.
So this would be a good one to use for the standard setting, for instance, that Harry was asking about.
Exactly. So you've been considerably patient. So this is all that I wanted to make sure that we covered. You guys may be a little bit worn out, so I want to take this moment to see if open the floor for questions, comments. You may want to interact with the system a bit on your own now.
Hey, David, I had a question.
Go ahead.
Thinking back to the kid maps that you showed us, with a lot of items, they sometimes look pretty busy. Like you showed how we could zoom in to get a clear kind of picture about which items were falling where on that map. Would it be possible to have like an option to, for example, turn off the items that are where kind of the model expected them to be, so the teacher or the user only sees the problematic items?
Funny you should mention that. You can, in fact, remove items that are not in the expected places.
Oh, okay. Awesome.
At the moment, we are organizing this way. What you're suggesting now, it's probably better to actually put it like hide the ones that are well adjusted or well fitted to the model. We can probably put it in like a more simple terms in order to make it more conceptually easy to look in. Thank you, Jared. I'm gonna.
I'll send you and Anita an email about it, just so we have it in writing. Thank you.
Oh, excellent. Veronica, no, at the moment, I mean, you can export the data for each one of the calibrations. It just occurred to me, it should be fairly easy for us to add a download option that will allow you to get the parameters for different calibrations more easily to do further analysis. Yes, that's a good point.
David, how much time or latitude do we have to import our own data and try things out? A few days, a few weeks?
Mark?
Oh, well, I mean, whatever people need, I think. I mean, we can keep this up for a while, can't we, David? It's not too expensive, is it?
Sure. At the moment in the IOMW server, you can create your own accounts. We will leave it. This server is particularly larger because we were expecting around 20-25 people to be all using it at the same time. We have others. The demo server is always available also, so you should be able to log in and play around. One thing I should warn you though: the import features at the moment are working, but do not have all the validations, meaning that if the errors will not display nicely. If you do something wrong, it will not tell you at the moment what you did wrong. It will show you an error. You need to go back and sort of figure it out on your own. As we just deployed that feature, as we move on and the features get more and more used, we start to create particular errors that more nicely explain to the user what is the issue. You may run into some of those, given that the import features are not fully validated in that sense. However, if you see an error, most of the time you can just press back and look into what happened. There should be no further problem.
It would be helpful, I think, for them to be able to get hold of these slides that you've shown us.
Very.
If they're
I
going
will upload them. Yuki mentioned, and you can later, Yuki, perhaps to the attendees, share the link. I will also add them to ask Ana Maria to load them into the news, so you can also download them from within BAS.
That's helpful. Yeah.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
But first, of course, many thanks for your nice presentation. I really enjoyed to see all this BAS system. I have only read a little bit about it before. My question is whether if I'm gonna play around and the data that I'm uploading, what do I need to think about with regard to data security? What happened with the data? Will anyone else get access to the data, or is it only me, or will it appear on some server, or what's happened?
I mean, I think that I'm fairly comfortable saying that unless you explicitly ask us to preserve it, at some point where we'll just turn off the server and we will not use it. I mean, if you're uploading in your account, we will not reuse that data. We obviously have access as admins on the server. We could see it. So if it's highly privileged or you have some very stringent IRB, it may not, I mean, it would be equivalent of loading it perhaps in some kind of cloud drive. The people administering the service will be able to access it. It's not encrypted. That's what I'm saying. We cannot assure you that we are unable to look at it. We, as a policy, we don't go looking into it for sport.
It's not that question you might find it interesting. It's just a question on what I'm allowed to do with the data that I have from different projects. So then I know the level of it and know which data set I could choose for trying.
Yes, as I was saying, basically we are not encrypting it in such a way that only you have access. If we needed to, we could access it. We don't do it again. And the security to the access of the system, I mean, we are not, I don't usually think of our system as something that it's particularly interesting for hackers. We try to comply with the reasonable security measures for servers. And to that extent, your password, assuming that there is not an intensive attack trying to breach the system, your password is an important part of the security measures for avoiding people accessing your data.
Yeah, perfect. Then I know, I just wanted to check it out. So it's probably, it's like in most systems, but I wanted to make sure because I come from the healthcare field and a lot of data we have is associated with that we are not allowed to share it, and especially according to the European rule for the GDPR, what's in English, or GDPR is an English name abbreviation, but it's a European law. But well, I know how we can handle it. Thanks for your answer. It's correct. I'm fine.
Ana Maria, you can correct me if I'm wrong. The accounts that you're creating in your server, they are siloed, so you should not be able to see the other ones. Correct me if I'm wrong, please. Okay, yes, you guys are siloed in each one of the different projects. And obviously, as a very basic recommendation is that if you're just playing with your data, remove any actual identifiers that could be used to track the persons that you're using.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks.
I just
and again, many thanks for your interesting presentation.
Oh, thank you very much. I am sharing the screen just to show you that we have available in the system, if you're going to be looking around, an extensive health file uploaded that shows information about the different modules and step-by-step instructions to perform some of the most basic tasks. So if you are wandering around on your own, this should be a helpful resource to you. And more importantly, if you're running around and you run into any issues, have any questions or requests, you have this very nice feedback button that we get emails on the development team when people use the feedback section to let us know of any problem, question, or request they have on the system. This is the construct module. I did not show it because I wanted to emphasize the other ones, but here you can see the construct conception of statistics. This is the image that I showed you before. You can see that you can add descriptions, examples, and supplemental content for each one of the constructs that you have in the system.
You've got some questions in the chat box, David.
Oh, thank you. Let's take a look at that. Latent regressions. That's actually not that hard. I mean, we already have covariates and we obviously have the EAP, so that is something that it's pretty straightforward to add. Is it possible to work in team in the platform? Yes, I did not talk about this. I mentioned that we have the system. You can have many different profiles of users. You can have many people accessing. You can share things between different users. And in a project, if you're working with someone who is basically two researchers, you can both have admin accounts and have access to all of the information that is being shared within your project. So yes, the system is extensively used for collaboration. I would say that's actually the most common scenario that people use it.
I just want to say, David, having been a fairly intensive user of the precursor to BAS, the formative assessment development system, the changes that have occurred in the last 10 years are just astounding. This functionality, and it's beautiful, really well done.
Yeah, when I was preparing this workshop, I ran into some slides of FATS, which was the precursor of this, that actually were from like a little more, like that was like 12, 13 years ago. And yes, we've been working on this version of BAS for 10 years. Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah, well, it's my colleague Jan Morrison with the STEM education ecosystems is intensely interested in our making use of BAS in our Caliper ecosystem success measurement project. So before she knew you'd be doing this workshop, she asked me early last week, can we finally have a conversation with Mark Wilson about how to get a hold of this? Well, hold on, we're going to get an update here pretty soon. There's a lot to talk about here. I'm more enthused than ever. Thank you.
I'm glad we are not the only one that noticed the difference. We have built it extensively. I'm going to show you just the screen for items that you can have different kind of items created. I'm not going to go into that. I think that would be pushing it. But you can also play around and look at the options of the different items that you can create that are reasonably flexible for current options. Thank you, Nicole. I'm glad it's reasonably intuitive to use. Yes.
Yeah. David, I have a comment and a question. Comment I want to add to the kudos. I think this looks like a great piece of software. This is my first in-depth and exposure to BAS. So I want to thank you for this great efficient introduction. My question is, what about fixing item parameters, item anchors? What options do we have for that, if any? And, I'm thinking in particular, like, I use the DRDP where we use the delta dimensional alignment. Can we work with that in BAS?
The answer is yes and no. Yes, to the extent that that's functionality is typical and we have a lot of projects using it. No, and the extent that it doesn't have an interface at the moment. We do have a format of a CSV file that you format in which you give us the parameters and we can fix it. The system allows that. It is programmed underneath to deal with that. We have not created screens that allow you to input that directly into the system. I mean, those are two different challenges. One is programming such that it can do it, which it can in the backend, but it's different. It's another challenge to have the time to create an interface that is amenable and it's understandable for a user. We are working on deploying those screens, but if you have a project that does rely on that, does require that, we can actually fix parameters and go into more details of the estimation. But at the moment, we need to import it on the back end, not on the front end.
Thank you.
This is just a look at the options in the system. As I told you, there are a number of things there to set. So there's a lot of things that you can, lose yourself wandering around in the system if you're so inclined.
I think we should look to perhaps uploading this as a tutorial too, David, what you've just done for people. We might maybe edit it if you want to, but that would also be another nice resource for people, not just the slides, but actually to hear what you've got to say about them, which I think is actually needed for the slides. Yeah, that'd be nice.
No problem.
I've had requests for that actually.
Yeah, I can think of a lot of people who would have gotten a lot out of being here today.
No, I think that sounds good. We should probably edit it and then we can upload it. Again, thank you very much for your patience and for attending. I'm happy to answer more questions and if you want to take a look at different things, but I don't want to keep you more than we need to. So again, I'm going to ask if there are any questions or comments. Thank you, Harry.
Pleasure.
Okay, so apparently there are no other questions. Again, thanks very much for staying with the group and enjoy taking a look in the system. Hopefully you will find it useful. As I said, there are many other features that you will be able to discover. Take a look at the help file. We really try to cover and keep it up to date on the features. And thanks again. Have a great day.
Thank you very much. Thanks for a great presentation.
Bye, everyone.
La grabación se ha detenido.